So, just to obviously start off with this interview, kind of recapping what we're talking about, we've seen gas prices going up recently. We've had conflicts in the Middle East, a lot of people talking about that being the cause for those gas prices going up. And I just want to hear from, again, your guys' side of what that's been looking like, what concerns have been with customers, and just what you guys have been seeing as a whole when it comes to those numbers.
You bet. Well, just to clarify, we don't have customers, but we do analyze gas and oil prices and we report on those. But I mean, we don't have gas people. I mean, we don't have people buying gas from us, obviously. But um, we are seeing gas prices spike because we've seen crude oil prices soar to near 4-year highs following the conflict in Iran. And also, we are having stalled tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. So these global factors are sending crude oil prices soaring. In fact, crude oil prices this week are trading anywhere between $95 and $100 a barrel. Just a few short weeks ago, they were around $60 to $65 a barrel. And very roughly, for every $1 increase in the price of crude oil, we will see about a 2.4 cent increase in the cost of gas because crude oil is that main ingredient that we make a gallon of gas and a gallon of diesel out of. So when we see crude oil prices spike, unfortunately, gas and diesel prices are also going to rise. And the numbers are pretty staggering this week. The national average for regular jumps 48 cents to 3.48 a gallon. This is the highest price since July and August of 2024. Oregon, our gas prices are also jumping here, but interestingly enough, we have one of the smallest week over week jumps in the nation. Our average for regular gas is up 28 cents in the last week to 4.21 a gallon, and Oregon has the 48th largest week over week jump, so one of the smallest jumps. And the last time we had gas prices this high was in September of last year. In Eugene, Springfield, very similar story. We're up 28 cents for the week to 4.16 a gallon, and we were last this high in September of last year.
Yeah, and kind of going back and talking about those past jumps, looking into those reasons, we saw, like you said, last year around in September, we saw this go up. We've seen obviously with the Iraq War, we saw gas prices go up. We saw during COVID gas prices go up. Can you talk a little bit about that for, the average consumer who is going out and getting gas, seeing these gas prices going up and not necessarily understanding with war or with certain situations why? Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about those situations and why that is?
Sure. Well, there are several factors that influence gas and diesel prices, but one of the biggest is the price of crude oil because that's that basic ingredient that gas and diesel are made out of. So it's like if you go to the store and you buy a loaf of bread and you find out that flour costs significantly more, you're going to be paying more for that loaf of bread. It's the same situation with crude oil. When crude oil prices rise, we, the consumer, end up paying more for gas and diesel at our local gas station because that gas station has paid more for that product and then passes on the expenses to us, the consumer, when we fill up our tanks. Anytime we have a major oil producer involved in a geopolitical event, a conflict or a war, we will see crude oil prices rise. We saw this when Russia invaded Ukraine because Russia is one of the top producers of crude oil. Likewise, with Iran, it is a global oil producer. The U.S. does not consume Iranian oil, but China and India do, and they are major economies, and they have relied on that Iranian oil. So anytime you have a major global oil producer involved in a conflict, crude oil prices will go up. And it can be tough for folks to realize that because I know I get asked this question every day. Why on earth is gas more expensive here when we are located so far away from Iran? Why are gas prices rising in Eugene, Springfield, or in Portland, or in Bend because of a conflict that's going on halfway around the world? And it's because of the impact to crude oil prices and concerns about global oil supplies. And so when you have a major oil producer not being able to provide oil to the marketplace, which might be consumed by China or India, and then you have tanker traffic stalled through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a narrow waterway that borders Iran in the Persian Gulf. And so you have these things happening, crude oil prices shoot up, and then we, the consumer, end up paying more. It's also worth noting that this conflict is happening at a time when we normally see seasonal increases in the price of gas. And gas prices normally go up starting in late winter and going through the springtime because of several things that are happening. First of all, refinery maintenance season happens, and refineries get shut down and inspected for a certain amount of time. That puts a crimp in supplies. And then we switch this time of year to cleaner burning summer blend fuel, which costs more to produce. So we have a temporary crimp in supplies due to refinery outages, and then the switch to a more expensive product. And we always see seasonal increases in the price of gas this time of year. And with this conflict involving Iran and the Middle East, that has sent crude oil prices to near 4-year highs. And you and I end up paying more for gas at our local gas station because of all of this.
Yeah, and kind of talking about, again, going back to the consumer, because those are the people that we're seeing obviously affected day to day, again, along with those oil companies. It's a major impact. What can people, expect going forward? When could this go down? What can happen? What can companies do? What is going to happen long term with this? What can the consumer expect?
Yeah, unfortunately, no one knows how long this conflict is going to go on and how long it's going to have an impact on crude oil prices and the transportation of crude oil and also the impact on infrastructure. We just don't know. We unfortunately don't have a crystal ball where we can look at and say, okay, this conflict's going to be over in a few weeks or a few months. But, no one knows how long this conflict will end, and how much it might continue to impact global crude oil prices. So my advice to consumers would be, take some steps now to conserve fuel and hopefully save money, and also shop around to get the best price. As I'm sure you've noticed when you drive down the street or walk down the street, you can see gas stations that are across the street from each other selling gas at very different prices. So use an app on your phone. The AAA mobile app is a great one that lets you track and find the gasoline that's cheapest, closest to you. There are a number of different apps that do this. So get an app on your phone, and that way you can look and save some money at the pumps. Other things you can do is look into loyalty programs. A lot of stores, if you sign up for their loyalty program, a lot of grocery stores will then give you a discount at the pumps. And stores like Fred Meyer, Albertsons, Safeway, those are a few that offer programs like that. Likewise, in some markets have places like Costco gas or Fred Meyer gas that often will have cheaper gas anyway, so consider going there. You can also look at how you buy that gas, what you use. A lot of us like to pay cash for gas, but you can consider using a credit card because there are credit cards that will give you a cash back bonus if you spend money on gas. And some credit cards will give you anywhere from 1 to 5% back on that purchase. So those are some things that you can do to save a little bit of money. Other things you can do, really simple, take all the extra stuff out of your car. If you're driving around with extra stuff in the hatchback or the trunk or in the back of your pickup, the more heavy your vehicle is, the more fuel it's going to burn. So get rid of that extra stuff. Also, too, we find that if you travel, at a slower speed, let's say between 50 and 60 miles an hour, you're going to burn less fuel than if you routinely drive 65, 75 miles an hour. So if you slow down, you can save gas. And then do basic common sense things like, combine your trips. Don't leave the office or home several times a day. Try to combine all those trips in one outing. So those are some ways that you can save a little bit of money on gas. And I wish I could tell you when this roller coaster ride is over, no one has a way of knowing how long this conflict is going to last and how it will continue to impact supplies. Right now there are just fears about supply and demand, and that's why we're seeing our prices so elevated.
Yeah, and going into the bigger topic, here we have Tyree oil, they're being impacted again also by this conflict and then those prices going up. Can you talk a little bit about, on the bigger picture of what maybe a consumer won't see with those certain companies and what's being affected, like you talked about the tanker being stuck and how that impacts them as well? Again, something that, they deal with the gas prices, but these are other things coming in as well, impacting them.
Yeah. Well, I can't speak to specific companies because what we do is just kind of look at the very big picture and see what the factors are that are impacting crude oil prices and therefore gas and diesel prices. But with the conflict in Iran, you've taken a major global oil producer, Iran, off the market. And even though the U.S. does not consume Iranian oil, there are other major consumers around the globe that do, including China and India. So those countries have to look elsewhere for this product. Likewise, we have tankers stacking up in the Strait of Hormuz. That is stalled tanker traffic. So that's basically oil and other goods that are not moving through that waterway. And so what we're looking at is a big crimp in supplies. And as we learned back in Economics 101, supply and demand, if you have a product and all of a sudden you're not able to produce as much of that product or distribute that product, you're going to see prices rise. And that's basically what we're seeing right now.
Absolutely. Well, I think those are all of the main questions that I have right now. If there's anything else you want to add about the situation, about, again, the conflict and how it's impacting, again, those prices for consumers.
Yeah, I think you got it. I've been asked a few times today, other times that we've seen big jumps like this. We saw a similar jump, but a little bit lower. We saw a 45-cent weekly jump after Hurricane Katrina back in September of 2005, and that's because that storm impacted refining, production, drilling in the Gulf. And, Gulf Coast states were impacted by Hurricane Katrina, and we saw prices rise again because of supply and demand. And then we saw other major weekly jumps after the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We saw the national average and the Oregon average shoot up around 58, 60 cents at the start of that conflict in that first week after the conflict. So these types of big jumps do happen when we have a conflict or Mother Nature impacting oil production. And unfortunately, I wish I could tell you when this thing's going to come to an end, but obviously none of us have any way of knowing how long the conflict will continue in the Middle East and Iran.
Yeah, I think I have one more question,
Of
kind of
course.
going into smaller towns, rural towns. From my own experience, I went to school at WSU, so I was on the Pullman-Moscow border,
Hmm.
and I always traveled to Moscow to get gas because gas over there was cheaper, and I always had seen that they were cheaper in smaller, more rural towns. Is that something that is a trend that we're seeing, that if, say, someone from Eugene, Springfield went down to, say, somewhere like Cottage Grove or Cresswell, that those prices could be different as well? Or is it just, again, as a whole, really impacting the state?
Yeah, it's really tough to say because it really depends on the market. And you have to realize that most gas stations are owned by small to medium-sized companies. Gone are the days when big oil operated most gas stations. So it really boils down to individual business plans, and there are as many individual business plans as there are gas stations. So, some gas stations will try to sell their product at the cheapest price possible, sometimes even making it a loss leader so that you'll fill up there and then hopefully go in the store and, grab a bag of chips and a bottle of water while you're there. There are other gas stations that might be in more affluent areas and feel that they can charge a little bit more. There are some, might be the only gas station in town on a freeway off ramp, and they might charge a little bit more or less depending on their business plan. So it really varies. And as far as smaller markets, sometimes they will take a little bit longer for price increases to take effect because, in simple terms, they don't sell as much product. So if I bought crude oil a couple of weeks ago at a cheaper price and I still have that product, I might be able to continue selling that product at a cheaper price. But then when I have to refill, when a tanker comes to my station and fills up my tanks again, I've bought it at the more expensive price and I will sell it at that more expensive price. You also have to look at an area and what kind of taxes it has and other fees. And so that can also vary. For example, in Oregon, Portland has a 10-cent a gallon tax to help roads in the Portland area. And so gas in the city of Portland is going to cost, automatically 10 cents more than many other areas. But it's really hard to generalize. as far as, if I go to one market, is it going to be cheaper than another? It also really depends on the competition in each individual market. And so some markets are really, really competitive with prices, and everybody kind of scrambles to have one of the cheaper prices. And then there are other markets where, it's not as competitive, and you tend to have prices that are probably all very similar. So unfortunately, there's no one answer. I think the best advice I can give is put an app on your phone like the AAA mobile app, and that way you can look on your phone at your fingertips and see where the cheapest gas is closest to you on any given day.